All right, so welcome to Conservation Biology. This is Phase 2, Part 1. So what I mean by Phase 2, you guys have seen this before, this is the second chunk of the Conservation Biology lecture. So Phase 1, 45 minutes worth of content, just like you were sitting in class on Monday. Phase 2, we'll see, probably another 45 minutes of content, just like you were sitting in class on Wednesday. So I break them up like this into phases to try to reduce the file size. That's really what a lot of this is about. I don't want to give you one file that is just massive and you can't download it, you can't access it, but trying to reduce file size. All right, so phase 1, we talked about the background of conservation biology, the concern about extinction and how this subdiscipline is trying to address those issues. And then we left off with discussing values, direct values and indirect values of biodiversity. So as we're moving into phase 2 here, what we're going to start talking about are extinctions and the concern here. So this was mentioned in phase 1, but let me reiterate it. We will see the extinction of 10 to 20% biodiversity within the next 10. So, all right, let me back it up here. We're going to see the extinction of 10 to 20% of the Earth's biodiversity in the next 20 to 30 years, maybe 50 if we really make some efforts and take some action. But that takes global cooperation. So this is what we expect. This is what we will see in our lifetimes. You will see more than me because you'll be alive longer than I will. Your children will see more than I will, more than you will, because again, they're going to live through this. Hopefully everybody can survive and we can find ways to balance it, but we have to get more people on board. That is the challenge, is getting people on board with conservation, understanding why it's important. So to convince people to do things, we have to identify the causes of extinction and then tackle those. It's just like a doctor. If you go in and you're sick, they try to identify the source of your illness. Is it bacterial? Is it viral? Is it protist? Is it dietary? Is it environmental? You have to identify the source of the problem before you can address the problem. So when we look at extinctions, we have identified categories for what is pushing species into extinction. Now, something to mention, lots of species are getting pushed to extinction because of multiple problems. It's not a single reason that this one thing caused you to go extinct. It's usually a combination effect. You get hit from multiple sides with different things and you just can't survive. But typically, habitat loss, overexploitation, species introduction, or what we call alien or invasive. The other category would include, includes things. I'm going to do it where you can read it. Includes things like disease. Let me do a text box here. So in the other category, we want to think about things like disease, pollution, and climate change. This is a new category, relatively speaking. Yes, climate change is pushing species to extinction. We have documented cases where species have gone extinct because of climate change. So typically, again, it's a multiple factor issue. It's not one single thing. So I want you guys mentally to jump back weeks and weeks and weeks ago when we were talking about amphibians, and jump back even earlier in the semester to when we talked about fungus, and put those puzzle pieces together. So the amphibian extinction crisis, roughly 30% of amphibians are sitting on the endangered species list. It's 1/3 of every known amphibian species is threatened with extinction in the near future. Why? Habitat loss and fungal infection. Remember Tritiomycota, the tritids? They parasitize the skin of the amphibian. They basically harden it so it doesn't work as a respiratory membrane anymore, and the amphibian suffers a heart attack. Add on top of that decreased habitat. We could also throw in there pollution. We can also add climate change. So you got all 4 of these factors coming at these poor little critters and is wiping them off the face of the planet. Tells us something. Tells us there's a huge problem with our environment and all these other factors. If you have a healthy amphibian population, they can resist fungal infections. If there's plenty of habitat, they can resist fungal infections and enough genetic diversity in the breeding population to evolve resistance. But we don't have that. And this is why we're seeing this extinction crisis. So when we talk about habitat loss, it is the #1 factor. This devastates species diversity and species richness. We impact the habitat in a variety of different ways. One way is just simply destruction. Cut it down, it's gone. Plow it up. Fill it in, whatever. It's gone. Habitat's gone. Pollution plays a big role in habitat loss. We often call this degradation, where it's just been so polluted that stuff can't live there. The water has changed the pH, the salinity, it's got heavy metals in it, pathogens, etc. That means your habitat's no longer viable. Even though it's still physically there, it's just been so degraded and polluted, things can't survive in it. Disruption. It's just so disrupted, it's altered and changed. Species can't survive that environment. And then fragmentation. It's just broken up and chopped up into tiny little pieces. Yeah, you got a little pocket here, a little pocket there, another pocket there. But some species need continuous habitat. They need a big chunk of habitat for survival. And we'll get into this in the lectures in a little bit here. Maybe a species needs 2,000 acres of continuous habitat for the species to survive. And you put a subdivision in the middle of that, and you run roads through it, and you have a shopping mall and development. And now, okay, we don't have those 2,000 continuous acres. Population can't make it. So out of all of the recent extinctions, habitat destruction has contributed to 85% of those extinctions. Or we could say habitat destruction, loss, etc. Okay, that is the #1 issue in conservation. Not the only one, but the biggest. You want to save the most and do the most good? Preserve habitat, restore habitat, plant some trees, restore native prairie. It could even be a patch in your front yard. That's going to give butterflies food, give insects food, give birds food. That little bit, we call them butterfly way gardens. Those little pockets are better than nothing. So take a look at the forest. Forest was clear cut for lumber, maybe development, who knows what other reasons. All the species in that area either died or they moved to new areas. So imagine if you were some animal that's mobile and you were living in this area, and now all of a sudden your population goes into the neighboring forest. That means there's too many, whatever they are, squirrels, groundhogs, foxes, too many of those living in this patch of forest, which increases competition, overconsumes resources, and now all of a sudden the population here and the ecosystem stability here is decreasing because you just all of a sudden had a whole bunch of immigrants come into your population and you can't support it. Some of them moving in is fine, but if all of them that lived in that entire community disappear and move into yours, you're overpopulated. So here's just some quick examples of habitats that have just been wiped out. The rainforest in Madagascar, pre-human colonization, 1950s, 80s, early 2000s. That red represents the rainforest. Over 90% of it is gone since humans colonized Madagascar. 16 of the 31 primate species on Madagascar are threatened or have gone extinct. So if you loved the movies, the cartoons Madagascar, King Julian, and all those lemurs, that's the only place that those guys are found, is on the island of Madagascar. Most of them are threatened with extinction in the near future because they have no place to live. Habitat destruction, habitat loss. Fragmentation, this is when you chop up or divide the habitat. Not good. Certain species, again, need a certain continuous range of habitat to survive. It leads to a thing known as the edge effect, where the edge of the woods is hotter, drier, different species live there. So one big pocket of woods has less edge than all these little pockets. So you think about wind and snow and rain and pollutants. It's hard for that to reach the center of this pocket here because how much space and distance there is. But pollutants go through this entire little pocket. Temperature is going to be higher through this entire little pocket than the interior temperature of this big patch of woods. So it's little things like that, oh, well, we still have all this habitat. Is just in small pieces. It doesn't do it. It doesn't do any good. So habitat is our number one issue to deal with. This is why there are groups trying to preserve habitat, trying to restore it, trying to save as much habitat as possible. So imagine you go home and all of a sudden your house is gone. Oh, somebody just took it. Now you have to move in with some of your relatives, and there are 3 families living in one house. How fun is that going to be? Yeah, get the point. All right. Okay, so that's number 1. Second cause, introduced or alien species, non-native species. Hit the hyperlink. It's an entertaining little video, but this is the reality of the entire Mississippi watershed. Asian carp. Now, that's not real, or I shouldn't say that. Those dots are not completely accurate. They have spread beyond where those dots are at. This species was brought into the southern United States to help with eating algae. They're phytoplankton eaters, algae eaters. They were brought in to eat algae and waste treatment plants, and then, oops, they got out. Well, they got out, and the problem is they outcompete native species, and they drive them into extinction. So they are pushing lots of the native species that should be in the Mississippi, the Illinois River, the Sangamon River, even Lake Michigan, the Great Lakes. They're pushing these things into extinction because they just outcompete them. There are no native predators here for these suckers. So there's no control on their population. Exponential growth. Population explodes. They eat up all the food. The other species starve to death. Their populations go down. Carp population goes up. It's what happens when we get these introduced or alien species in ecosystems they shouldn't be in. Our next lecture, we're going to look at Illinois and what's going on in our forests with the honeysuckle.